Asterisk, asterisk, poor single dad let a strange girl stay for one night unaware she was a millionaire's daughter. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin. It was a cold evening in a small town in the Midwest. A light rain fell steadily, adding to the grayness of the streets. Marcus, a single father, was making his way home after a long day of working 2 jobs. He had always done his best to provide for his daughter, but it was never easy. After his wife passed away, life became a constant struggle. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floors. Marcus arrived at the door, his hands stiff from the cold, and opened it to find his daughter, Lily, sitting at the kitchen table, her homework spread out in front of her. She looked up and smiled. "How was work, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft and warm. Marcus managed a tired smile. "Same as always," he replied. "Busy, but we get by." He set down his bag, trying to shake off the exhaustion. They were just beginning to settle into their routine when a knock at the door interrupted the quiet evening. Marcus opened the door to find a young woman standing on the doorstep, drenched from the rain. She looked like she had been walking for hours, and her eyes were wide with uncertainty. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know who else to ask. My phone's dead, and I'm stranded here. Could I stay for just one night? I don't have anywhere else to go." Marcus hesitated for a moment. He wasn't one to let strangers into his home, but something in her eyes made him pause. He could see that she was genuinely in need. And, as a father, he understood how important it was to help someone who was struggling. "Come on in," he said finally. "It's cold out there. You can dry off by the fire." The girl smiled gratefully as she stepped inside, shivering from the cold. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with relief. As Marcus closed the door behind her, he couldn't help but wonder who she was, and why she was so far from home in the middle of a storm. But for tonight, all that mattered was that she was safe. Little did he know, this small act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, Marcus woke up early as usual, the first rays of sunlight barely peeking through the curtains. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. He stood up and stretched, feeling the familiar ache in his muscles from the previous night's work. He glanced at Lily's room, hearing her soft breathing through the door. She was still asleep. He decided to go downstairs to make some coffee, trying to get a jump start on the day. As he made his way to the kitchen, he noticed that the guest room door was slightly ajar. The girl he had let stay the night, whose name he hadn't even asked, was still asleep in the guest bed. He smiled to himself, feeling a sense of fulfillment in helping someone in need. Marcus hadn't expected her to stay so quiet, but it was clear she was grateful for the roof over her head. His thoughts were interrupted when Lily walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Dad," she said, her voice soft and sleepy. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" he asked, pouring her a glass of orange juice. She nodded, taking a seat at the table. "I'm glad we could help her," Lily said, looking up at her father with wide eyes. "She seemed nice." Marcus smiled gently, but there was a slight tension in his chest. He didn't know much about this girl, and it was unusual for him to let a stranger stay without knowing more. "Yeah, she seemed like she needed help. Let's just make sure she's okay." Just as Marcus finished speaking, the girl emerged from the guest room, rubbing her eyes and yawning. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice still carrying a trace of sleepiness. Marcus couldn't help but notice how different she looked this morning. Her hair, still damp from the rain, was now drying and falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Her face was soft, almost angelic, but there was something guarded in her expression. "Morning," Marcus replied with a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" The girl nodded, still looking a little unsure. "Yes, thank you." "I don't know how to thank you for letting me stay." Marcus waved his hand dismissively, his modesty shining through. "You don't need to thank me. It was the least I could do." He handed her a mug of coffee. You're welcome to stay for breakfast if you'd like. She hesitated for a moment, but then nodded gratefully. I'd appreciate that. As they all sat down to eat, Marcus couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The tension that had been hanging over him for the past few days seemed to lift. Even if just for a moment, it felt good to have someone else in the house. A small part of him was even relieved that Lily was getting along with their guest. After breakfast, Marcus decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. It had been a while since he'd had time to clear his head, and he wanted to give the girl some space. He wasn't sure how long she would stay, or if she had anywhere to go, but he didn't want to press her for details. He left the house, locking the door behind him. As he walked down the street, his thoughts drifted to his own struggles. It wasn't easy being a single father, working long hours, trying to make ends meet, and raising Lily on his own. But he was doing the best he could, and that was all he could hope for. He glanced back at his house, seeing the girl sitting on the porch, her legs crossed and her gaze distant. She looked like she was deep in thought, her expression unreadable. It made Marcus wonder what kind of life she had before coming here. What had led her to be out in the rain, alone and seeking help? He shook off the thought, reminding himself that it wasn't his place to ask. He returned home later that afternoon, and when he walked through the door, he found the girl and Lily sitting together on the couch, chatting about something. They both looked up as he entered, and the girl gave him a small smile. "Hey, I hope you don't mind, but I was wondering if I could stay for a couple more days," she said. Marcus paused, considering her request. He hadn't expected her to stay much longer, but she seemed sincere. And honestly, he didn't mind the company. "Of course, you can stay as long as you need to," Marcus said, smiling warmly. "We're happy to help." The girl's eyes softened with gratitude, and for the first time, Marcus saw a glimpse of who she might truly be. She wasn't just a stranger. She was someone who needed help, just like so many others in this world. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was doing something good, something that made a difference. Little did he know, this small act of kindness would soon lead to a discovery that would change his life forever. As the days passed, Marcus continued to go about his routine, but something had shifted in the house. The girl, whose name was now known to be Sophie, had settled in comfortably. She helped around the house, shared stories of her life, and even spent time talking with Lily. It seemed like she was trying to find some sense of normalcy, but there was still something about her that made Marcus feel uneasy. He had grown attached to her kindness, yet there was always a wall she kept up, as if she was hiding something. He couldn't help but wonder about her past, especially given how she had shown up on his doorstep in the middle of a storm, looking lost and vulnerable. Marcus never pressed her for answers. He didn't feel it was his place. But a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being entirely honest with him. A few days after Sophie arrived, Marcus was sitting in the living room with Lily when Sophie came in, looking more serious than usual. She hesitated before speaking. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice soft but earnest. Marcus looked up from his book, surprised by the tone in her voice. "What's going on, Sophie?" he asked. "Is everything okay?" Sophie took a deep breath before she spoke again. "I'm not who I say I am," she began, her gaze dropping to the floor. Marcus furrowed his brow, confused by her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I'm not just some girl who got lost in a storm," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm the daughter of a very wealthy man, a millionaire actually. My name is Sophie Donovan, and my father is the CEO of Donovan Enterprises." Marcus stared at her, his mind trying to process what she had just said. The room seemed to grow quieter as Sophie's words sank in. Lily, who had been sitting next to Marcus, looked at Sophie with wide eyes. "Wait, what? You're a millionaire's daughter?" she asked, sounding almost incredulous. Sophie nodded, her expression filled with shame. "I know this sounds crazy, but I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want you to think I was just some spoiled rich girl. I wanted to experience life outside of my father's world, to see what it's like to live as a normal person." Marcus was still trying to process her confession. Sophie had always been so down to earth, so humble, that he never would have guessed she came from wealth. He couldn't help but feel a bit betrayed, though. She had kept such a huge part of herself hidden. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus finally asked. His voice a mix of confusion and hurt. Sophie's eyes met his, and she seemed to gather the strength to answer. I was scared, she admitted. I was tired of people only seeing me as the daughter of a millionaire. I wanted to be seen for who I am, not for my father's money. But now I don't know how to explain myself to you. Marcus took a moment before responding, trying to digest everything she had just said. I understand, he said slowly. But you have to realize that you can't keep hiding who you really are. We all deserve honesty. Sophie nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I know, she whispered. I just didn't know how to say it. Marcus stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Sophie, I'm not mad at you, he said gently. I just want to make sure that you're okay, that you're safe. If you need help, if you need anything, you can always count on me. I'm not going to treat you any differently because of your father's money. Sophie looked up at him, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Marcus, she said softly. You don't know how much this means to me. Marcus smiled, trying to ease the tension that had been building between them. You're welcome. And don't worry. We're in this together. But from now on, let's just be honest with each other, okay? Sophie nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. Okay, she replied. As the days went on, Marcus could tell that Sophie was beginning to let down her guard. She was more relaxed around him and Lily, and the walls she had built around herself seemed to be crumbling bit by bit. However, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sophie's story. He still didn't know why she had come to him, why she had chosen his humble home to seek refuge. But he decided not to press her for more answers. Whatever her reasons were, he knew that he had done the right thing by offering her a place to stay. Little did Marcus know, Sophie's arrival in his life was just the beginning of a series of events that would change everything for both of them. In the days that followed Sophie's confession, things began to shift in subtle ways. The atmosphere in the house grew lighter, as Sophie started to relax more around Marcus and Lily. She was no longer the girl with a secret, but just Sophie, someone trying to figure things out. Marcus, though still processing her revelation, found himself feeling a new sense of responsibility toward her. He had taken her in when she needed help, but now, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie's world was much more complicated than she let on. As much as she tried to blend in, he could see that there were things about her life that she wasn't ready to share. One evening, after dinner, as Marcus was cleaning up the kitchen, Sophie came to him, looking a little uneasy. Can we talk? She asked, her voice quieter than usual. Marcus wiped his hands on a dish towel and turned to her. Of course. What's on your mind? Sophie hesitated for a moment before speaking. I've been thinking about what I told you. About who I am, she began. I think there's something I need to tell you, something important. Marcus put down the towel and gave her his full attention. He could see the seriousness in her eyes. Go ahead, Sophie, he said softly. Sophie took a deep breath and began. I didn't just come to you because I needed a place to stay. There's more to it. Marcus's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Sophie looked down at her hands, clearly struggling with her words. My father, she said quietly. He's not just a businessman. He's involved in things I never wanted to be a part of, and now I think I'm being followed. Marcus stood there, shocked, as Sophie's words sunk in. Followed? He repeated. Sophie nodded. I think he's been trying to find me, or someone else is. I don't know for sure, but I feel like I'm being watched. It's the only explanation for why I've felt so unsafe lately. Marcus could hear the fear in her voice, and it unsettled him. Sophie, what are you telling me? He asked. Sophie looked up at him, her eyes filled with vulnerability. I didn't want to drag you into this, Marcus, but I think I've been in danger for a while now. That's why I left home in the first place. I thought maybe if I could just disappear, I'd be safe. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure what to make of it all. Sophie's story was starting to take a dark turn, and he didn't know how much of it he could trust. But he also knew that she had nowhere else to go. I'll help you, he said firmly, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. Sophie looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. You'll help me? She asked, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "Of course," Marcus replied. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Sophie let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and a tear escaped her eye. "Thank you," she whispered. The weight of the situation began to settle over Marcus as he realized that his life, and Lily's, might be more affected by Sophie's past than he had imagined. He didn't know who was after her or what they wanted, but he had made a promise to help her. Little did he know, things were about to escalate in ways he couldn't have predicted. The following days were filled with uncertainty. Sophie kept a low profile, rarely leaving the house. She insisted that Marcus and Lily go about their normal routines, not wanting to cause them more worry than they needed. But Marcus could tell she was still on edge. He had never seen her so tense before. One morning, as he was getting ready to leave for work, Marcus noticed something strange. His truck, parked in the driveway, had a small dent in the rear bumper. He didn't remember hitting anything, and there were no signs of anyone else being around the vehicle. His heart sank. Sophie's fears were becoming more real by the day. Later that week, Marcus decided to take a trip to the local police station to report the strange incident with his truck. He didn't know if it would do any good, but he felt he needed to take action. As he sat in the small waiting area, a police officer came out to greet him. "Can I help you, sir?" the officer asked. Marcus explained the situation, mentioning Sophie's concerns about being followed and the damage to his truck. The officer listened carefully, then gave him a reassuring smile. "I'll file a report for you," he said. "But I'll be honest, there's not much we can do unless we have a clear lead." Marcus nodded, knowing that the officer was right. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. Sophie's life was now intertwined with his own, and he had to protect her. The next day, as Marcus returned home, he found Sophie sitting on the porch, her gaze distant. He walked over to her and sat down beside her. "Sophie," he said gently, "I reported the damage to the truck to the police. They'll keep an eye on things." Sophie nodded, though it was clear she wasn't comforted by his words. "I appreciate it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus took a deep breath and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to get through this. I won't let anything happen to you." Sophie looked up at him, her expression softening. "Thank you, Marcus. You don't know how much that means to me." As they sat together in the quiet of the evening, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. Sophie's past was catching up to her, and he had no idea how dangerous things might get. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to turn his back on her now. The following week, the tension in the house was palpable. Marcus could tell Sophie was still on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. She had stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary, and Marcus had taken extra precautions to make sure she felt safe. It wasn't just the dent in his truck that had him concerned. There was a creeping sense of dread that hung in the air, one that he couldn't shake no matter how hard he tried. Sophie had barely spoken of her family since her confession, but Marcus knew that something bigger was at play here. He had tried his best to keep life normal for Lily, but even she had noticed the change. One afternoon, while Marcus was at work, Sophie sat on the porch, staring out at the street. She had grown restless, unable to stay still for long. Her mind was constantly racing, and every sound, every movement, made her jump. The world she had been trying to escape from seemed to be closing in on her, and she could feel the walls tightening. Sophie had decided it was time to tell Marcus everything, every detail of the life she had left behind, the things she hadn't said, the truth she had buried deep. That evening, as Marcus walked into the house, he found Sophie sitting in the living room, looking as though she had made up her mind. She was sitting on the couch, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her face was serious, but there was an underlying tension in her eyes. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. Marcus set his bag down and sat beside her. "What is it, Sophie? You look like you've been carrying something heavy." Sophie took a deep breath, the weight of her next words clear in her posture. "I've been thinking a lot about everything lately," she started, her voice wavering slightly. "And I realize that if I don't tell you the whole truth, it's not going to get better. I've been running away from my past for too long, but I can't hide from it anymore." Marcus listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. He could see the conflict in her expression, the fear of opening up completely. "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready," Marcus said gently, though he could feel a lump forming in his throat. But if it's going to help you, I'm here." Sophie nodded, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. "My father. He's not just a businessman. He's involved in things that go beyond just money and power. Dangerous things. He has connections with people who do things in the shadows. And I got caught up in it." Her words hung heavy in the room, the weight of her confession pressing down on both of them. "I wasn't just running away from him, Marcus. I was running away from the people he works with. They're not people you can just walk away from. They don't let people go easily. I thought if I disappeared, they would stop looking for me. But now, I think they know where I am." The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken fears. Marcus could feel his heart rate quicken, and though his mind screamed at him to stay calm, a part of him was terrified of what Sophie was saying. "What exactly do you mean by dangerous?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. Sophie hesitated, and for a moment, she looked almost apologetic. "I can't go into all of it right now," she said softly. "But my father's business dealings aren't just about legitimate companies. There are people he's made deals with that have their hands in things they shouldn't. People who would stop at nothing to get what they want." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had known this wasn't going to be easy, but hearing it all laid out like that made it all too real. "I never wanted this for you, Sophie," he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. "You don't deserve to be dragged into any of this. But I'm not going to let them hurt you. You're safe here, I promise." Sophie gave a small, shaky smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't know how to make it right," she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "I don't even know if I can." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer what little comfort he could. "You don't have to figure it out alone. We'll figure this out together, okay?" Sophie looked up at him, her expression softening for the first time in days. "Thank you, Marcus. You don't know how much that means to me." As Marcus sat beside her, he couldn't help but feel that the quiet life they had been leading was about to come crashing down. Sophie's past had found her, and he couldn't protect her from it forever. But for now, he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Whatever this was, whatever danger loomed on the horizon, he would stand by her. He had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but he was about to find out, and Sophie, despite her fears, would have someone to fight for her, no matter what. Days passed, and despite Marcus's best efforts to keep Sophie safe, the pressure began to build. Every creak of the house, every car that slowed down on their street, sent a chill down Sophie's spine. She had become hyper-aware, constantly checking the windows, walking past the door with a cautious glance, to see if anyone was watching. Marcus tried to reassure her that they were safe, but he could see the fear in her eyes that told him otherwise. One afternoon, when Marcus was home from work, there was a knock at the door. He froze for a moment before walking slowly to the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. Sophie, who had been sitting at the kitchen table, immediately stood up, her expression tense. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Marcus opened the door cautiously, only to find a man standing on the other side. He was tall, well-dressed in a suit, with sharp features and an air of authority about him. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but guarded. The man's eyes flickered past Marcus, landing on Sophie, who had emerged from the kitchen. A knowing smirk played at the corners of his lips as he turned back to Marcus. "I'm looking for someone," the man said. "Someone who might be staying here." Marcus's mind raced. He had seen the man before. He was one of the people Sophie had mentioned. Someone from her past, someone who could be dangerous. "I think you're mistaken," Marcus said, his voice steady. "No one here matches your description." The man didn't seem convinced. He stepped forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you, I'm looking for Sophie Donovan." Sophie's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, Marcus saw her panic. She stepped forward, standing next to Marcus. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice shaking. The man ignored her, instead focusing on Marcus. "I'm here on business," he said, his tone cold. "It's in your best interest to tell me where she is. I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." Sophie stood still, but her mind was racing. She had known this moment was coming, but she had hoped it wouldn't come so soon. She glanced at Marcus, silently pleading for him to understand the gravity of the situation. "Who are you?" Marcus asked, his protective instincts kicking in. The man finally gave a small, almost dismissive smile. "I'm just a messenger," he said, his eyes flicking back to Sophie. "But I think you know who sent me." Sophie's stomach dropped. She knew exactly who this man worked for her father's associates. They weren't just people who did business. They were the kind of people who would do anything to get their way. Marcus stood tall, refusing to back down. "You're not welcome here, and if you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." The man's expression hardened, but he didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he warned. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Sophie stepped forward now, placing a hand on Marcus's arm. "Please don't," she said, her voice trembling. "It's not worth it." Marcus looked at her, seeing the fear in her eyes. He wasn't sure what was more dangerous, standing up to this man or letting Sophie face her past alone. Sophie's voice cracked as she spoke again. "I'll go with you. Just don't hurt him." The man's expression softened slightly, but there was still a coldness to his demeanor. "You should have listened sooner," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You think you can hide forever. It doesn't work that way." Sophie felt the weight of his words, and as she looked at Marcus, she could see the confusion and pain in his eyes. She didn't want him to be involved, didn't want to drag him into this mess, but now it seemed there was no choice. The man stepped back, a signal for Sophie to follow him, but Marcus wasn't going to let this happen. He stepped forward, blocking the doorway. "No, you're not taking her," Marcus said firmly. The man paused for a moment, studying Marcus as if weighing his options. Finally, he gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're brave, I'll give you that." He took a step back, glancing once more at Sophie. "But remember, you don't get to make the rules. You're playing a dangerous game." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the doorway, his heart racing. Sophie exhaled in relief, but quickly turned to Marcus, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to drag you into this." Marcus took her by the shoulders, his voice steady but filled with concern. "You didn't drag me into anything, Sophie. I'm here because I care about you. You don't have to go through this alone." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought I could outrun it, but it's only getting worse." Marcus pulled her into a hug, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. He didn't have all the answers, and he couldn't promise that everything would be okay. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let her face this alone. As the night grew darker and the house grew quieter, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sophie's past had finally caught up with her, and now, it seemed, the only way forward was into the unknown. The next morning, Marcus was still trying to shake off the tension of the previous night. Sophie's words about her father's dangerous connections, the man who came to the door, the threat, everything had left him with an uneasy feeling. He couldn't help but worry about Sophie and Lily, who was still unaware of the full extent of what was happening. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful day, but Marcus knew that it wouldn't be. Sophie had insisted on staying inside, still shaken from the encounter with the mysterious man. She kept to herself, and Marcus didn't want to press her for details. He knew she was struggling with what to do next. But as the day went on, something else weighed on his mind. Sophie had been running from her past for so long, and it seemed like it had finally caught up with her. He couldn't sit idly by anymore. That night, after Lily went to bed, Marcus sat down with Sophie in the living room. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Sophie sat across from him, looking more tired than he had ever seen her. Her usual composure had slipped, replaced by the exhaustion of someone who had been on the run for too long. "We need to figure out a plan," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "You can't stay here forever. We have to make sure you're safe." Sophie looked at him, her eyes heavy with sadness. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "My father's people, they don't just let things go. If they find me here, they'll come after you too. I don't want that for you, Marcus. You and Lily don't deserve to be dragged into this mess." Marcus leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "We'll figure this out, Sophie. I'm not just going to let you go. You're not alone in this." Sophie's lips trembled as she tried to hold back the tears. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she said, her voice breaking. "But now, it feels like I'm putting everyone in danger." Marcus reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You didn't do this. You're not responsible for your father's actions," he said, his voice soft but full of determination. "But you don't have to face this alone. We'll find a way out of this, together." Sophie nodded, but the doubt still lingered in her eyes. "I don't know if there is a way out," she whispered. "I've tried running, but every time I think I'm safe, they find me. I just don't know if I can keep doing this." The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Marcus didn't know how to respond. He knew Sophie had been through more than anyone should ever have to endure, and the fear in her eyes was real. But he also knew that if they didn't act soon, things would only get worse. Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision. "We're not giving up," he said firmly. "We're going to get you out of here, Sophie. I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Sophie looked at him, the flicker of hope in her eyes mixed with uncertainty. "You're risking everything for me?" she asked, her voice small. Marcus nodded. "I'm not going to let you face this alone. You've already been through enough. If we have to leave, we'll leave together." Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude. But the reality of the situation still weighed heavily on her. "I don't want to drag you into my mess," she said softly. "You have a life here, Marcus. You have Lily. I don't want to take that away from you." Marcus shook his head, his expression resolute. "You're not taking anything from me. This isn't about just me. This is about us. And I'm not letting you go through this alone. I'll find a way to keep you safe. I promise." Sophie swallowed hard, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't fully understand. She had never expected someone to offer her this kind of support, especially not after everything she had put him through. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus smiled gently. "You don't need to thank me. Just focus on staying safe." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them lost in thought. Sophie was still unsure of what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe there was a way out. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Marcus by her side, maybe they could figure it out together. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. As the night wore on, the shadows of Sophie's past continued to loom over them, but Marcus was determined. He wasn't going to let her go down without a fight. Sophie had found a safe place, even if just for now. And he wasn't going to let anyone take that from her. The following days were filled with anxiety and uncertainty. Marcus and Sophie remained in the house, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, but the threat loomed over them. Sophie, though grateful for Marcus's protection, couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. She spent most of her days sitting quietly, thinking about what to do next. Marcus kept a watchful eye on the street, trying to make sure no one else came looking for her. Sophie knew that they were living on borrowed time, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. As the days passed, Sophie began to realize that the only way to truly protect Marcus and Lily was to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't keep hiding forever. She needed to confront her past, face the people who were after her, and put an end to the danger. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was running out of options. One evening, as Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, working on some paperwork, Sophie came to him with a look of determination in her eyes. He noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. Marcus set down his pen and looked up at her. "What's on your mind, Sophie?" Sophie took a deep breath before speaking. "I think it's time to face this head on. I can't keep hiding forever. The longer I stay here, the more dangerous it becomes for you and Lily. I need to take control of this situation before it gets worse." Marcus stood up, concern flashing across his face. "Sophie, I know you're scared, but we can figure this out together. You don't have to face this alone." Sophie shook her head. "You don't understand, Marcus. This isn't just about me anymore. They're after you too. You and Lily are in danger because of me. I can't let that happen. I need to go back, talk to my father, and end this once and for all." Marcus's heart sank at the thought. He knew that Sophie had been running from her father's dangerous world, but he didn't want to let her go back into it. "Sophie, no," he said, his voice pleading. "I won't let you do that. You don't have to go back to that life. We can leave together, start fresh somewhere far away." Sophie looked at him, her eyes filled with sadness. "I wish it were that simple, Marcus, but I can't keep running. They will find me, no matter where I go. I need to go back, confront my father, and make him understand that I'm done with his world. I can't keep living in fear." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Sophie placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. "I've made up my mind," she said softly. "And I need your help. I can't do this alone." Marcus hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. He knew the risks involved, but he also knew that Sophie was right. If they didn't confront this now, the danger would only continue to grow. With a heavy heart, he nodded. "All right," he said. "We'll do this together. But we need to be careful. We need a plan." Sophie smiled, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Marcus. I knew you'd understand." Over the next few days, they began to plan. Sophie and Marcus knew that they couldn't just walk into the lion's den without preparation. They needed to gather information, make sure they were ready for anything. Sophie had contacts from her past life, people she could trust, at least for now. Marcus helped her reach out to them, gathering intel and making sure they had a way to protect themselves if things went wrong. It wasn't long before they realized that Sophie's father was planning something big. His business dealings were more than just illegal, they were dangerous, and he had enemies who would stop at nothing to take him down. Sophie knew that she had to get in front of the situation before it exploded. She couldn't let her father's enemies think they could control her life any longer. The plan was set in motion. Sophie and Marcus would confront her father, make it clear that she was done with his world, and take whatever steps necessary to protect themselves. The night before they were set to leave, Marcus sat with Sophie in the living room, his mind filled with doubt and fear. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. Sophie nodded, her expression resolute. "I have to do this, Marcus. It's the only way." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just want you to be safe. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Sophie smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "I know you will. And I'm not going to let anything happen to you or Lily." The next morning, they set off for the meeting, knowing that they were walking into a world of danger. Sophie had made her decision, and now she had to face it head-on. As they drove toward her father's estate, the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. Sophie's heart raced, but she knew that there was no turning back. This was the only way to stop the cycle of fear and danger. When they arrived, Marcus parked the car, and they both got out, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Sophie took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Let's do this," she said, looking at Marcus with a mixture of fear and determination. Marcus nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Together," he said firmly. And with that, they walked toward the entrance, ready to confront the past and whatever dangers it held. As Marcus and Sophie approached the imposing gates of the estate, the weight of what they were about to face hung heavily in the air. Sophie's heart was pounding in her chest, her nerves on edge as she looked at the tall, ornate iron fence that marked the boundary of her father's world. The estate, with its sprawling grounds and massive mansion, seemed almost like a fortress, a place where secrets were kept and lives were controlled. It was the last place Sophie ever wanted to return to, yet here she was, walking toward it with Marcus by her side. They reached the front door, and Sophie hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus stood behind her, his presence a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in this. He placed a reassuring hand on her back. "We'll face it together. You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. Sophie nodded, trying to steady her breath. She had spent years running from this place, from the people inside, and now she was walking straight into the heart of it. She had made the decision to confront her father, to tell him that she was done with his world, but a part of her still feared the consequences. With a deep breath, Sophie opened the door. The grand entryway of the mansion was exactly how she remembered it, luxurious, cold, and full of silence. The polished marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's light, and the walls were adorned with expensive artwork that seemed to stare down at her, judging her every move. As they stepped inside, the silence felt suffocating. The air in the mansion was thick with tension, and Sophie could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her. She was a stranger in this world now, but it was a world that would never truly let her go. "This way," a voice called out from the hallway. Sophie turned to see her father's personal assistant, a woman named Evelyn, approaching them with a tight smile. Sophie had never been fond of Evelyn, but she was part of the machine that kept her father's empire running. "Your father is expecting you," Evelyn said, her tone all business. Sophie nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to face him, but there was no turning back now. As they walked down the long, polished corridor, Sophie's mind raced. She had no idea what to expect from this confrontation. Her father had always been a man who operated from a place of power and control, and Sophie knew that nothing had changed. The man she was about to face was not the father. She once knew it was a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his grip on his empire. They reached a large set of double doors at the end of the hallway. Evelyn knocked once before pushing them open, revealing the opulent office inside. It was a room that screamed power, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and a massive desk where Sophie's father sat, his back to them as he stared out the window. The moment he turned around and saw Sophie standing in the doorway, everything seemed to freeze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if time had stopped, and the past they had tried to bury was suddenly right in front of them. Sophie's father, Gregory Donovan, was exactly how she remembered him, tall, stern, and imposing. His sharp features were framed by neatly combed hair, and his eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Sophie. "Sophie," he said, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of something darker. "I didn't expect you to return." Sophie felt her stomach drop as she stepped further into the room. "I didn't expect to either," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "But I'm here now, and there are things we need to talk about." Gregory leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as he studied her. "What's this about, Sophie? You've been running from me for years, and now you think you can just waltz back in and make demands?" Sophie felt a surge of anger rise within her. She had spent so long running, so long hiding, and now her father was treating her like she was the one in the wrong. "I'm done running," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. "I'm done with your world, your empire. I want out, and I'm not leaving until you understand that." Gregory's expression darkened, and for the first time, Sophie saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected: uncertainty. "You think it's that easy?" he asked, his voice cold. "You think you can just walk away from everything I've built? You're a part of this, Sophie. You always have been, and you always will be." Sophie shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. "Not anymore. I'm not a part of your world anymore, and I never will be. I've seen enough of the damage you've caused. I've seen enough of the lives you've ruined." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "I won't be part of it anymore, and I won't let you drag me back into it." Gregory stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was now towering over her, his face inches from hers. "You have no idea what you're saying," he growled. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built. You're not strong enough." Sophie's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but her resolve was unshaken. "I don't need your empire. I don't need your money, your power, or your control. I'm done." Marcus, who had been standing silently by her side, stepped forward, his presence a silent show of support. "She's right," he said, his voice firm. "You don't control her anymore." For a moment there was silence in the room. Sophie's father's eyes flicked to Marcus, and for the first time, he seemed to take notice of the man standing beside his daughter. The tension in the air was thick, but Sophie stood her ground. She had made her choice. This was the moment that everything changed. No matter what happened next, she was no longer a part of her father's world, and she wasn't going back. The tension in the room was unbearable. Sophie stood her ground, her chest rising and falling as she faced her father, the man who had spent her entire life controlling her every move. Gregory's icy gaze never left her, his features hardening with every word she spoke. Marcus stood beside her, unwavering in his support. The silence stretched on, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Finally, Gregory broke the silence, his voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sophie," he said, his words like a cold slap. "You think you can walk away from everything I've built? This empire? This family?" Sophie's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She had heard these words too many times before. "I'm not walking away from anything, Father," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm choosing to live my life the way I want to. I won't be part of your world anymore. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, and the power games." Gregory's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sophie saw a flash of anger. He stepped forward, his towering presence intimidating. "You think you have a choice in this?" he hissed. "You are nothing without me. You're a part of this family and you always will be. Don't you dare think you can just walk away." Sophie felt a surge of determination well up inside her. She had spent too long running, too long hiding from the truth. But now, with Marcus by her side, she was ready to face her past, no matter how painful it was. "I'm not your puppet anymore," she said, her voice unwavering. "I won't let you control me. I'm free, and I'm taking control of my own future." For a moment, Gregory seemed taken aback. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightening into fists. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by his own daughter. "You're making a huge mistake," he warned, his voice dark and filled with a quiet rage. "You can't just walk away from me, Sophie. You don't know what you're up against." Sophie held his gaze, refusing to back down. "I've been living in fear of you for too long," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "But not anymore. You don't scare me." She could see the flicker of disbelief in her father's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something colder, more calculating. "Fine," he said after a long pause, his voice dangerously calm. "If you want to walk away, then go ahead. But know this, Sophie, you will never be free of me. I'll make sure of it. You'll regret this." Sophie's stomach twisted at his words, but she didn't flinch. She had heard this kind of threat before. But this time, it was different. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was an adult, and she was ready to take control of her life. "I won't regret this," she said firmly, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." Gregory's eyes burned with fury, but he said nothing more. He turned away from Sophie and walked to his desk, his back to them, as he resumed his previous position. "Get out," he said coldly, without looking back. "If you're done here, then leave." Sophie's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She turned to Marcus, who gave her a small nod of support. Together, they walked toward the door. As they stepped into the hallway, Sophie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had made her choice, and for the first time in years, she felt free. But as they walked out of the mansion, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Her father's threats had never been idle, and she knew that he would do everything in his power to make sure she came back to him. But for now, Sophie had made a break from his world. She was no longer a part of it, and with Marcus by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. As they drove away from the estate, Sophie looked out the window, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: she would no longer be a prisoner of her father's empire. She was free, and that was the most powerful thing she had ever felt. As the days passed, the weight of Sophie's decision began to settle in. The freedom she had gained by walking away from her father's world felt liberating, but it also came with its own set of challenges. Sophie couldn't help but worry about what might come next. Her father's threats were never empty, and she knew it wouldn't be long before he tried to bring her back under his control. But for now, she was free, and that was enough. Marcus was by her side every step of the way, supporting her through the uncertainty. But Sophie could see the toll it was taking on him as well. The life they had planned for had been turned upside down, and every day brought a new challenge. Despite the looming threats, they tried to make the most of their time together. They spent their days doing simple things, enjoying quiet meals at home, taking walks through the park, and talking about a future that, for the first time in a long while, seemed possible. One afternoon, as they sat in the living room, Sophie looked at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've done so much for me, and I don't know where I'd be without you." Marcus looked up from the book he was reading and smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I'm here because I care about you. You don't have to face this alone." Sophie felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never expected to find someone who would stand by her, not after everything she had been through. But Marcus had proven time and again that he was different. He didn't see her as the daughter of a powerful man or as a burden. He saw her as Sophie, and that was something she had never experienced before. But despite the comfort Marcus's presence brought, Sophie couldn't shake the fear that something was coming. Her father was a man who didn't like to lose, and she knew he wouldn't give up without a fight. She had to be prepared for whatever was to come. One evening, as they were having dinner, the doorbell rang. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and the sudden sound of the bell made her tense. Marcus looked at her, concern in his eyes. "I'll get it," he said, standing up. Sophie nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the possibility that her father had sent someone to find her was always in the back of her mind. Marcus opened the door, and Sophie's breath caught in her throat as she saw who was standing on the other side. It was Evelyn, her father's personal assistant. Sophie's heart sank. She hadn't seen Evelyn in years, and the last time they spoke, it had been under less than friendly circumstances. "What are you doing here?" Sophie asked, her voice cold. Evelyn gave her a tight-lipped smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here to deliver a message," she said, her tone businesslike. Sophie felt her stomach churn. She knew this wasn't a casual visit. Whatever message Evelyn had, it wasn't going to be good. Marcus stepped forward, his protective instinct kicking in. "I think you should leave," he said firmly. Evelyn's eyes flicked to Marcus, her gaze calculating. "I'm just here to talk," she said, ignoring his request. "Your father wants to speak with you. He wants to work things out." Sophie shook her head, her anger rising. "No, I'm done with him. I've made my decision, and there's nothing he can do to change that." Evelyn's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Your father doesn't give up that easily, Sophie. He'll find a way to bring you back. You can't outrun him forever." Sophie's hands clenched into fists, her emotions a swirl of anger and fear. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I'm free, and I won't be controlled by him anymore." Evelyn's expression darkened. "You're making a mistake," she said, her tone hard. "You think you can just walk away from everything, but he will make you regret this. He always does." Sophie didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had made up her mind. Evelyn could deliver her father's message all she wanted, but it wouldn't change anything. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to let fear rule her life anymore. With a final glance at Marcus, Sophie turned and walked back into the living room, her head held high. She wasn't going to let her father's threats stop her. The world she had left behind was one of manipulation and control, and she was done with it. "We'll be all right," Marcus said softly as he closed the door behind him, returning to Sophie. "We'll face this together." Sophie looked at him, her heart full of gratitude. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "But with you by my side, I know I can face it." Marcus smiled, his hand resting on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out. Together." They stood there for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that was yet to come, hanging in the air. But for the first time in a long time, Sophie felt like she was finally in control of her own life. And no matter what her father or anyone else threw at her, she knew she would fight for her freedom, for herself, and for the future she wanted to build with Marcus. The days following Evelyn's visit felt like a heavy weight pressing down on Sophie's chest. Despite her resolve to move forward, the words she had heard echoed in her mind. Her father would never give up on bringing her back into his world, and the threats would only continue to grow more dangerous. Yet, Sophie had made her decision. She was done being controlled by the fear her father instilled in her. With Marcus by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. It was early one morning when Marcus received a call that changed everything. Sophie was in the kitchen, quietly making breakfast, when she heard him speak into the phone. His voice was tense, and Sophie couldn't make out the words, but she could tell something was wrong. Marcus's face turned pale as he hung up the phone. He turned toward Sophie, his eyes wide with concern. "What is it?" Sophie asked, her heart racing. "Sophie," Marcus said quietly, "it's your father. He's made a move." Sophie's stomach dropped. She had known this was coming, but she hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to steady her breath. "He's not just threatening anymore," Marcus explained. "He's coming after you. He's already sent people to look for you." Sophie felt the world spin around her as the gravity of the situation hit her. Her father's influence was vast, and it wasn't just him she had to worry about. The people he worked with were ruthless, and she had already seen how far they were willing to go. "We need to leave," Sophie said urgently. panic creeping into her voice. Marcus nodded. I agree, but we need to be smart about it. We can't just run. We need a plan. Sophie took a deep breath, her mind racing. I don't know how much longer we have before they find us. We need to go now, before it's too late. Marcus looked at her, his expression firm. We will, but we're not doing this blindly. We need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere they won't expect us to be. Sophie nodded, knowing he was right. She couldn't just run in fear anymore. It was time to take control of the situation, but she wasn't sure where to go or who to trust. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly scared. They spent the next few hours gathering what little they could, some clothes, money, and a few important documents. Marcus made some calls, arranging a place for them to go, a safe house where they could lay low. Sophie didn't ask too many questions. She trusted Marcus, and that was all that mattered. As they packed, Sophie couldn't help but feel the weight of what she was leaving behind. Her father's empire, her old life, everything she had known was slipping away. But she didn't regret it. She had chosen this path, and she was determined to see it through. With everything packed, Marcus and Sophie left the house. Sophie glanced at the small home they had made together, wondering if she would ever see it again. The streets outside were quiet, but Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She knew that her father's people were already out looking for her. As they drove toward their destination, Sophie's mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. How long would they be safe? How long before her father's reach found them again? But there was a small part of her, buried deep beneath the fear, that felt a sense of relief. She was free. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from anyone. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. After a few hours, they arrived at the safe house, a secluded cabin, far from the city. Marcus made sure everything was secure before they entered. The place was simple but comfortable, a far cry from the lavish mansion Sophie had grown up in. She was grateful for the quiet, for the peace that this place offered. But she knew it wouldn't last forever. Sophie couldn't help but feel that they were still in danger, that her father would find them no matter where they went. But for now, this was their refuge. The weight of everything that had happened, the threats, the lies, and the pain was heavy on her shoulders. But as she sat in the small living room, with Marcus by her side, Sophie felt a flicker of hope. They were safe for now, and with Marcus's unwavering support, Sophie knew she could face whatever came next. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of her own life. She was no longer the daughter of Gregory Donovan, trapped in a world of wealth and manipulation. She was Sophie, and she was free. The road ahead would be difficult, but Sophie was ready to face it. With Marcus by her side, she would fight for her future, for her freedom, and for the life she had always dreamed of. And no matter what happened, she would never go back. Months passed since Sophie and Marcus had found refuge in the safe house. The days were slow, but they began to settle into a routine, one that was filled with a quiet sense of normalcy. Sophie still kept one eye on the world outside, wary of any signs that her father's influence had found them. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. Marcus was there by her side every day, supporting her as they built a life together. They spent mornings walking through the nearby woods, evenings by the fire, and nights simply talking about the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Despite the peace they had found, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her father was still lurking in the background, that one day the walls would come crashing down again. She had left behind everything she knew, the wealth, the power, and the dangerous games her father played, but his reach was long, and she was still his daughter. She had taken control of her life, but that didn't mean the past wouldn't catch up with her. One evening, as Sophie and Marcus sat by the fire, the sound of a car engine outside caught their attention. It was distant, but it was enough to make Sophie's heart skip a beat. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, and she felt her breath quicken. Marcus noticed the change in her expression immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sophie shook her head, trying to calm herself. "I don't know," she said, her voice tight. I thought I heard something." Marcus stood up, his protective instinct taking over. He walked to the window and peered outside, scanning the quiet road that led up to their cabin. For a moment, everything was still. "It's probably nothing," Marcus said, turning back to Sophie. but I'll check it out just to be sure. Sophie nodded, trying to push the unease aside. Marcus grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, leaving Sophie alone with her thoughts. She watched him through the window, her heart racing as she saw him walk toward the edge of the property. Sophie had told herself that they were safe, that her father would not find them again. But deep down, she knew that wasn't entirely true. She had made her choice, but the consequences were still out there, waiting for her. The tension in the air thickened as minutes passed, and Sophie found herself pacing the small living room. Every sound outside sent her heart into overdrive. She hadn't heard from Marcus in a while, and her mind began to race with all the worst-case scenarios. What if someone had found them? What if her father's people were here? Sophie stopped herself. No, she wouldn't go down that path again. She wouldn't let fear control her life. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. A moment later, the door opened, and Marcus stepped back inside. He was alone, but there was a serious expression on his face. Sophie's heart jumped into her throat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaky. "It's nothing," Marcus said quickly, his tone reassuring. "Just a car passing by. You're safe, Sophie." Sophie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're sure?" she asked, still unsure. Marcus nodded, his face softening. "I'm sure," he said, walking over to her and pulling her into a hug. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe here. We're safe." Sophie closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax in his arms. For a moment, the world outside faded away, and all that mattered was the warmth of Marcus's embrace. She had come so far since leaving her father's world, and now she could feel herself finally letting go of the constant fear that had once consumed her. It had been a long, difficult road, but she was ready to walk it without looking back. As the days continued to pass, Sophie and Marcus focused on rebuilding their lives. They found a small community nearby, a place where they could live without the constant fear of being hunted. Sophie even began to take on a job at a local bookstore, something simple and peaceful that gave her a sense of purpose. Marcus continued with his work, and though they both knew the past could come knocking at any time, they were determined to face whatever came next with courage and strength. Sophie's father may have been able to control her life for a time, but he could never take away her freedom. And with Marcus by her side, Sophie knew that no matter what the future held, she would never go back. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophie looked at Marcus, her heart full. "I never thought I'd find peace again," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "But I have it now, and it's more than I ever thought I deserved." Marcus smiled, reaching out to take her hand. "We've both come a long way," he said, his voice warm. "And we'll keep moving forward together." Sophie nodded, feeling the weight of everything she had been through. She had taken back control of her life, faced her fears, and found love and support in the most unexpected places. She had left behind a world of wealth and power, but in return, she had found something far more valuable: freedom. And that was all that mattered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophie and Marcus sat in silence, knowing that they had made it through the hardest part. The road ahead would have its challenges, but they would face them together. No matter what came next, Sophie was ready to live her life on her own terms. And for the first time, in a long time, she was at peace. In this gripping tale of escape and self-discovery, a young woman breaks free from her powerful father's world, a world of wealth and manipulation, to reclaim her life. As she navigates the dangers of her past, Sophie finds the strength to make bold decisions, and with the unwavering support of Marcus, she faces the consequences of her choices. This story of courage and love reminds us that even in the face of fear and uncertainty, freedom is worth fighting for. In true Millionaire Stories fashion, Sophie's journey is one of overcoming the odds and finding a sense of peace and normalcy after leaving behind an empire. With danger lurking at every turn, Sophie and Marcus work together to build a new life, proving that no matter where you come from or what you've been through, the power to change your future lies within. This powerful narrative of freedom and love mirrors many millionaire stories, where characters confront their pasts and choose their destinies despite the weight of their history. Sophie's journey is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a reminder that millionaire stories are not just about wealth, but about breaking free from the chains of the past to create a new life. As they face the unknown, Sophie and Marcus find solace in each other, creating a new world for themselves, one that is built on trust, love, and the freedom to choose their own path, proving that even in the darkest times, love and freedom can prevail. Sophie's escape from her father's empire is the ultimate narrative of resilience, echoing the themes found in the most compelling millionaire stories, where personal growth and transformation lead to a life of true independence.